We know you're here.
All right, so first question. Is there guidance available on when and where or not to use default services? It's been mentioned before that it's best to not use them. However, I'm not 100% clear on specific issues. Users are very much encouraged to use them in a tool.
Do you want to take this one?
No, but I will.
Okay.
So default services they're nice because they're a declarative way of getting your services stood up. These days, I think we prefer that instead of using default services, you use the ARM resource model if you want a declarative way of managing your services. So that's kind of we've been trying to get people to slowly move away from default services over time. Part of the reason is that today where default services are, they're in your application manifest. They kind of can cause some confusion and they're a little hard to work with. So for example, if you deploy your application and it creates a bunch of default services and then you want to change, say, the target instance size for that service, or change the replica size, or update some information about the metrics of that service, or you want to create a new service, the only way to do it is to create a whole new version of your application that makes those changes to the default services, and then you provision that version of your application and do an upgrade. Doing an upgrade of a type in order to change some instance level stuff is really confusing, and it can lead to some weird situations. So for example, you change some code at the same time, and then that code introduces a bug and the upgrade rolls back. So at the end of the upgrade, you added a default service. Is that default service there or not there? And since that's an imperative thing that we're doing on your behalf inside the cluster, you can get into weird situations where you're running application version 1 that didn't have a default service, but that default service got created and is sitting there in the cluster. Deletes work the same way, various parameters work the same way. So on the whole, it's a nice, smooth experience when things work well, but coupling it with the application type and then coupling it with application upgrades really makes things hard and a little bit weird. You can get into some weird situations, especially when upgrades fail and things don't work well.
So we essentially say use PowerShell or CLI or these other tools to when you're doing
things imperatively, right?
Yeah.
And we understand that imperative isn't great for everybody, and that's why there's the kind of resource model for creating stuff, and we're going to keep enhancing that. You could also use something like Compose.
So I was just say, we had it in the tools because it was a convenient F5 sort of experience.
Right.
But I think that we've learned actually that the local development thing and running it
in production is not quite the same.
And it's still okay for local development.
Right.
It's a fine way to get started, but at some point it's good to start removing those, and especially since you're going to end up deploying through through some CI pipeline like Jenkins anyways. Your deployment is going to be scripted. That's a good time to start moving your service instance definitions, where you say, here's the service I want and what its name is and what its partition count is. Move that out of default services and then put that into an actual deployment script.
And so there has been an improvement. We'll finish up on this and then we move on to some of the other questions. But there has been an improvement also to the tooling where there's default services are now optional. You can have inside of the scripts folder, you can add a PowerShell file called start-service.ps1, and then you can put your imperative service creation in there, so you can call a new service fabric service in there, and then instead of having this section in your default, in your manifest, which you have to figure out, does that ship to prod, does it not ship to prod, you can do that. You can still get that nice F5 experience where your services get created on F5, but you're getting it through this PowerShell script, which is more like what we'd expect people to do in the production environment. So hopefully that answers your question. Generally, we still say, yeah, stay away from them. We know that the tooling encouraged it for a really long time. We're trying to move the tooling away to where there's options and it's not showing that to you as much.
Okay, next question. Any published guidance on approaches to take and pitfalls to watch for when transitioning data from storing data relatively in a database and instead putting it into a stateful microservice?
So I don't think we have guidance specifically for that path, but we do have a lot of guidance around what to watch out for just when using reliable collections. I think in general, if you're coming to reliable collections from any other state store that is externalized from your application, the guidance applies just the same way. So primarily it's that when you're using reliable collections and stateful services, just having the state bundled in with your service means that the management of your service is now a little bit different than it was before. It means you can't go and just delete the service anytime you want, because that means you also lose your data. So your service becomes this thing that's living, and you have to upgrade it in place, and you have to manage it a little bit differently. That's kind of the main thing. There are a lot of small nuances with reliable collections that we do have published on our doc site, and a lot of it's just related to the fact that it's .NET.
I think that there's some other things about, a lot of the times when you're moving data from a database, the code that uses that database might have a bunch of implicit assumptions about what data it can touch kind of all at once. It might have these sorts of global views that go and look at all the tables. There might be weird transactions that start, and touch this table and start this other table. So you have to be very careful when you're moving the data out into the collections that you preserve as many of those semantics as possible. So if you need a consistent global view and you go and split that data across multiple dictionaries and multiple services, you don't have that global view anymore. If you need a transaction that touches table A and table B and you put them in different services, you can't do that transaction anymore.
Yeah, I think generally we say have data externally inside stateful services, so externally inside databases where you can, and then when you have bottlenecks and sort of latency issues, right, some of the stateful service. Right?
But it's all the things to watch for whenever you move to any what's called NoSQL store.
Right. I mean, I think that's kind of the big thing, is it's not a relational database.
Right.
So whatever you had that you depended on in the relational database, you probably don't have here, like object relation.
Foreign key
Foreign
constraints.
keys constraints.
Auto-generated
right?
IDs.
Secondary indexes.
Right, all that stuff you kind of have to figure out how important was it. If it was terribly important and critical to the behavior of the application, you either need to design those stateful services very carefully, or you might even still elect to keep some of that data in a traditional RDBMS for that reason.
Which is totally fine.
Yeah, either way.
There's no problem doing that.
But again, I think it comes down to, it's a perf game. It might be a scalability game to move it out of that single database. But you do have to be careful that when you're giving up that relational database, that you're not accidentally introducing consistency issues into your data.
That makes sense, and I guess to follow up on that, do you have any, I know it's not Service Fabric specific, but is there any guidance on how to necessarily go from relational to a NoSQL type store?
I don't know of a good guide, but I'd be shocked if something didn't exist, but I don't know of one off the top of my head.
I'm sure those exist. There's a ton of literature out there about denormalizing data, just for the ability to be able to partition it out and then scale it out horizontally. There's a ton of information out about that. And a lot of it applies the same way to reliable collections, because you're basically just moving from that from that relational database to what's essentially a key value store. So there's plenty of stuff there. And it doesn't have to be specific to any implementation of a key value store like Reliable Dictionary. You can always apply those concepts to reliable collections.
Okay, let's move on. So it goes, are there plans to integrate Kubernetes? The plans to integrate Kubernetes, we see now jump there. Like Docker or OCS did. Well, no. The answer to that. In the end, Service Fabric is a very extremely well-tested, well-vetted orchestrator. I mean, as we've talked about before, we started a project over 12 years ago. We run Microsoft on the Service Fabric. It's the way that we build our platform internally. We built it as originally to give out to the world as well. So we're one of the few companies, in fact, we're the only company that actually builds and runs all our Azure on top of the product that we then give away for you for free. Kubernetes is another one that's evolved from the Google side of the world, it's been given to the open source community. And so as Microsoft is concerned, we're committed to supporting both Kubernetes and Service Fabric. We look at both of those as the primary sort of orchestrators, if you want them, from choices that you can come to the platform. But in the end, Service Fabric is its own container orchestrator, and if anything, you'd build Kubernetes on top of Service Fabric and do it that way around.
Yep.
Yeah, just to add to that, you can always, if you want to, you can set up an etcd cluster on Service Fabric, and you can run it within a container or whatever, and then you can use those APIs.
So, I mean, the answer here is Microsoft's committed to both Kubernetes and Service Fabric, but Service Fabric is a container orchestrator in its own, well, an orchestrator, I should say, in its own right.
Yeah.
It does processes as well as containers as well as other things.
Yeah, it wouldn't add a lot to Service Fabric the way it did to, say, Cloud Foundry. Cloud Foundry had this thing where they were very application-centric, and then they wanted a way to just be able to run arbitrary containers. So they said, okay, well, you can use Kubernetes to do that.
Yes.
Service Fabric already lets you do all those things. So if you ran Kubernetes on, or if you ran Service Fabric and Kubernetes together, there's not a whole lot you get because there isn't much Kubernetes offers that Service Fabric doesn't already do.
Okay, what is the idea of the property management API? We tried to use it, but we've not seen any changes in Service Fabric Explorer. Is there the possibility to register a property change event?
So I'll answer this one. The property API was, it's kind of an appendix. It's something left over from a long time ago in Service Fabric when we thought that having a giant global configuration registry was a great idea. It is not a great idea. It's not a great idea because it introduces not only a central point of failure, but a really quick way to broadcast wrong config to a whole bunch of services that then screws them up in a way that you can't reverse easily. That's why we kind of don't promote it too much, and instead we talk a lot about config packages and rolling configuration updates and upgrades. Those are integrated with health. If something goes wrong, they roll back. You can attach versions to everything, and it's all very there. So we didn't rip the property management stuff out because, frankly, there's some folks internally at Microsoft that are still using it. We're trying to convince them not to use it anymore. But we have observed inside of Microsoft that pattern is dangerous, and so we don't talk about it too much. So you can still use it, but you know it's a bunch of rope, and you have to be very careful how you use the rope. So you won't see that in Explorer today. And one of the things that you point out that's missing from the property management APIs we actually stopped before we got there was notifications of property changes, because that's exactly what we don't want to do. We don't want to make it so that you can do one write to one key and you fat finger it, you screw it up a little bit, or it's corrupted somehow, and then that change gets broadcasted to a whole bunch of services, read the corrupted value, and then explode simultaneously globally. So since we wanted to stay away from that sort of scenario, we didn't ever actually even build that feature. It's possible that we'll bring something like this back in a future rev of Service Fabric. We've talked a lot about per service properties that maybe I could roll out, like I roll out application properties. We haven't built that yet, but that's something that we'd like to do kind of instead. As it is today, we kind of say don't use property management. Instead, I would look at service config packages and rolling out configuration changes that way.
Okay, next question. Is there a replacement coming up for ARM templates? Or any tool to easily create them because the documentation is not great on ARM templates?
Yeah.
Toss this one to Chaco because he hasn't been here in a few weeks.
Yes, sorry for not being here for a long time, but yes. So there's another dev and me. I've been thinking about doing this so that basically you can refer to standard templates in your own templates, so that it's very easy for you guys to just say, okay, I need a cluster, and then you can just refer to the standard template. So that's something which we're starting off. So there isn't a commitment at this point, but I would say in the next 2-3 months you should have some changes to that.
It sounds a little bit
The tooling
like
itself is. Our tool basically is the portal. The portal generates you the customized template you need. So if your suggestion is that improve the portal such that all the knobs are there, maybe the first thing which we'll do. The second thing which we've started to talk about is there a opportunity in the Visual Studio itself to see the places where you can generate a tool. But there isn't a plan to generate or give out a tool for template generation.
Yeah, I think it's, and I don't think we know the answer to this question, is whether also whether things like Visual Studio building an ARM template. I know they did a lot of work on creating ARM templates as VS, for example.
Yeah, they were trying to point.
We can't find out. We'll find out and see what we can post.
So I'll take this one. The instructions for using remoting v2 over here indicate that you need to do service instance listener, but I only see that for stateless services. Yeah, for stateful services, that'd be service replica listener. So a listener, a communication listener is kind of the base, and then we said there's a stateless instance listener for stateless services and a replica listener for stateful services. So you should be able to use that same mechanism. The next question is, does the remoting offer any sort of way to flow transactions? And then you have some sort of complete rollback. No, none of that exists, and that goes to a little bit, I think, about your other question about when I split things from one service into multiple services, from a database into a bunch of little microservices, that transaction boundary is something that you lose. And that is something you need to be a little careful in doing. And we don't give that back to you. That's kind of again, the performance thing. Usually those large transactions that spanned across all sorts of data were a performance thing in databases. And so, the reason that you put it into the services and split it out this way was ostensibly to get away from that. There's ways to get consistent data even when it's spread across multiple services. We typically see that more as a data pipeline. So either the data is flowing through another, central hub, which is pulling out just the metadata that it needs and tracking that consistently, and then that query can go to that, part of the pipeline. Or we see people use other remote stores, or kind of aggregating the data out of exhaust or telemetry to get that global view back. It depends a lot upon how transactionally consistent you really need it, whether or not it's okay if it gets ahead of the actual backing data or not. There's all sorts of considerations, but all of this comes from that same place of, if you're moving away from a big transactional database, you have to be careful how you split the data out so that you don't lose that consistency if you need it.
Somebody wants to see our pretty faces as opposed to the whiteboard.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think somebody just unlocked the view, so I can try and put it back. Let's
put up pretty faces up there.
There we go.
This should now be our pretty faces. We can't actually see.
I still don't see any pretty faces.
Yeah, there's faces. We'll give you that.
All right.
But hopefully that's better.
Are we moving on to the next question?
Yes.
Okay. There's a log analytics solution that stopped working.
Yeah. Currently shows oops message, out of 400 error messages. Does the team have anything to do with it? So the reason this is happening is because, especially if you're using log analytics with a Windows cluster, the OMS implementation doesn't have an understanding of container logs that are coming in unless you also add the container monitoring solution. So the 400 errors don't actually impact the solution from working. It'll just show you some errors that you can wave away, or you can add the container monitoring solution to your workspace and the errors will subsequently go away. We're also in the process of rolling out another version that doesn't have the problematic blades that are container related. So I'm about to sign off on that release as well, and that should come out in the next few weeks, so you won't be seeing those errors anymore.
Cool. I never imagined 7 people attended these calls. Actually, it's 8.
I want to know how many did you imagine?
George, you should attend these more often.
Like 1 or 30?
That's because we're so excited. This is our monthly highlight.
Yeah.
Okay, can we have an update on where we are with 6.1, especially around features around Service Fabric with containers on Windows?
So the first part of 6.1 we got a little, there was a big security thing that was rolling out recently to most clouds, not just Azure.
Something about Intel.
Intel did a whoopsie, so there were a bunch of updates that got blocked behind that. That kind of maybe understandably took some priority. That delayed us. That put us until after the holidays. So now everybody's back from the holiday, and we're working to patch up 6.1. We found some other things in testing while it was just running, while everybody was out for holidays. We're fixing up those things, and so 6.1 should be coming out soon. I think it's fair to say we're in like that day-to-day slip kind of area where it could start rolling out at any point. That's kind of the status of things.
As for the features on containers, you talked about.
Yeah, so as for the features on containers, some of these documents have actually started to show up already. So one of the things that we are doing is OS tagging. So for example, Windows containers which are running in process mode are not compatible between Windows Server 2016 and Windows Server 2016 version 1709. So what we are letting you do is in the service manifest, we are letting you specify, actually in the application manifest, we are letting you specify multiple container images for the same service, and we will pick the one that's appropriate for the OS that the VM is hosting. So for example, if you have a container image on Windows Server 2016 and you create one for Windows Server 2016 version 1709, you can point us to both of them for a service, and Service Fabric will pick the one that's appropriate for what your host VM is. So if it is 2016, we'll pick that one. If it is version 1709, we'll pick that one. Another feature that a lot of folks have been asking us for is integration with Docker health check. So that's, again, something that's coming with 6.1. So we will report health based on the Docker health check command. And we will also let you configure what you want us to do if health check reports say unhealthy. So you can even restart the container if it is reporting unhealthy, so we'll let you configure that. Another feature that's coming up is persisting containers. So a lot of folks run into this issue where, hey, my container starts and it fails, and it's gone now, so I can't really go back and see what happened, or can I debug this a bit more? Obviously, this is a debugging feature, so what we are letting you do in 6.1 is, even if a container crashes, we will actually let you keep the container there in the host, so you can actually go in there, log in, and you can check the container status and do any debugging that you want to do. So these are some of the features that are coming up with 6.1.
Chaco. Sorry, I come here.
Some of the other ones, are also, we are improving our, diagnostics with many of these things. So, when you get something like service package activation failed or code package activation failed, we will actually provide you with more helpful commands, which help more helpful text that will help you debug the issue further. And in my laundry list of features, the other one is also that with 6.1, you will have Docker logs exposed via a REST API, and you can actually see this in Service Fabric Explorer. So, you don't necessarily have to log into the machine in order to get the Docker logs. It will actually just show you directly off the bat in Service Fabric Explorer.
And many of these features are the same on Linux and Windows.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Except for, these features are the same for Linux and Windows. The OS tagging feature is Windows only because Linux containers are generally backwards compatible. But
Okay, cool.
Next question, we're on-prem and during upgrades, we see this error, which is that the cert somehow becomes lost, or you can't find it or can't access it. Said that previous deployments used the same cert. Now, there's nothing on the upgrade that should affect this. As a means of solving this, I would GIF all the things, because what it feels like is that something has changed. Either the specific cert that's being used, the thumbprint somehow changed, and so you're rolling out the new version and somehow it's looking for a different cert than it was previously, or something else is different in these two versions than you're expecting. The other thing that it could be is that if you're changing somehow the identity or the account that the service is running as, it might no longer have access to the cert that it had access to previously. So those are the two things that normally happen, is some extra character got copied into the thumbprint and it's different, or something about the identity that it's running as takes access to the cert away. Yeah, I think I see some other comments around it. I will continue to think about if there's other things I can think of.
You said these are config settings you're encrypting. I mean, it sounds obvious, but the certificate that you use initially to encrypt those settings, make sure that's the same one that is installed in the cluster that you're using to decrypt. So that when you use that certificate to encrypt, when you call our APIs to encrypt
That could be getting torn.
it puts in the certificate information that then the decryption side uses to find the cert on the machine. So if you're using a different cert accidentally or something like that, that could also lead to the same error message.
Yeah, something like that.
Little things like that, yeah, I mean, that happens to me too.
Okay, for a large cluster, 50 nodes and a 5 primary node type, a 5-node primary node type, any recommendations on the instance size for the primary node type? So I guess it's, what is the recommended size for the?
So I mean, this is a very nebulous question. So, but anyway, if we were setting this up, we would do a D4 is what we would do. But in your case, you have to figure out for yourself as to what kind of traffic you're expecting into your clusters. If it turns out that you are constantly creating and updating your services and you're hitting FM and the CM or system services often, then you should plan for it. Otherwise, we would recommend that you have at least a D2 or higher.
There's also the durability consideration.
Yeah, so the like Matt just pointed out, system services are stateful even if your services are not. So for those reasons, that particular primary node type, we would expect it to be at least at a silver durability.
And just as general guidelines, you definitely want to use at least D series machines, not A series. And then I think the number of nodes in your cluster isn't really the main thing to be concerned about. It's the number of services and partitions and replicas that are being managed. Basically, how much work they're doing. So it's something that you can kind of test out. If you have an idea of what your workload's going to look like, you can set up a test cluster, run that, and then you look at the 5 primary node type nodes and see if they're overworked or not. But D4 size nodes should be a pretty good place to start. I don't see that. I don't see that being insufficient.
Okay.
For example, when remember Mark Russ did this demo for million containers.
Million containers.
Yeah. So that was like a 3,000 node cluster, right? So at that point we were running D4s.
That was D4s for the primary node type?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So if D4s can handle 1 million things and 3,000 nodes,
that should be good.
Should be. Yeah.
All right. What are the plans for integrating around standards for containers like CSI, the container storage interface, CNI for networking, CRI for the runtime, and also other plans for managed offering like AKS?
Yeah, so the first half of the question, the answer is yes. So we are looking into how we can actually integrate with existing standards.
Okay. Yeah. For the managed offering like AKS, yes.
Yes. Yes. We would be very silly to not be thinking about that.
Yes. In fact, we've thought about it for years.
Yep.
And let's say yes, and we're working on it.
And we're working on it. That's probably the important part.
Yes, and we're working on it. So let's just say this year will be an exciting year. Okay, next one. I would like to work the following way. I'd like to have a cluster management application deployed using ARM template. This application should download other packages from sources, according to config on my local machines to install packages from local folders.
Yeah, I mean, most of this machine is just going to be tracing because you can't necessarily debug or wouldn't want to look inside those things anyway, or wouldn't understand. You don't have the source, so even if you're attaching the debugger, all you're doing is splunking through memory. So I think that's tracing, and you might, depending on if you know the sources of these packages, you might be able to push requirements back to them saying, hey, you have to emit more logs, or you have to integrate with health to give it more information, give Service Fabric more information about what's going on in production when things go wrong. That's really the only way out. Most of these things are usually black boxes, and other than looking at their output and heading over to Stack Overflow, there's not a lot that you can do when you don't have the source or don't want to attach a debugger.
I would like to explain what I mean exactly, because today I'm using such an application for deployment, and I'm talking about local debugging. So I have a solution in Visual Studio, I have source code, I have fresh build and stuff like that. So I'm able to, I have all the stuff. I just need to force Visual Studio to attach debugger to all the new services instantiated from my application. And today the biggest problem for me is that I need to maintain 2 separate configurations. One is for the production load with this application for deployment, and another one is a bunch of configs with just for Visual Studio purposes. So like just so different kind of applications with default configs that are not deployed the way, not deployed using the management application, but deployed using Visual Studio, so the debugger get attached, and it just don't work very well this way.
Are they all in one Service Fabric application or not?
No, these are multiple Service Fabric applications, and those applications are deployed from the management application.
I don't know of a good, you can just, I mean, if you can tweak the code in them, they can read a config setting that says whether or not when they start up they call debugger attach. But that's the only way that I would know.
That's what I was thinking of too.
Yeah.
So you can programmatically attach debuggers, and then you can just have a debug flag when you instantiate the application.
Yep.
That says this is a debug instantiation.
Yep. So if I'm running F5 in my local dev cluster, the application parameter says debug true.
Exactly.
My code hits the attach debugger switch, and then the debugger is attached. That's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, but this requires manual debugger attachment. Yes, after the debugger attach debugger switch happens, I think the Visual Studio displays, Windows displays the attach debugger dialog to pick which debugger should be attached. And my suggestion is that it might be worth to streamline this kind of scenario, because if I understand correctly, this is a very supported way. This is one of the reasons why some services are deployable using ARM templates, yes? So you have a management application and you have the workload as a separate application installed and managed by the management application.
Yeah, I agree. I think in general it would be good to have a way to debug a service or an application that wasn't deployed through Visual Studio. I think that's kind of what you're getting at, right?
Yeah.
So anytime I create an application outside of Visual Studio, there should be a way to get a debugger attached.
I'm kind of curious what would happen.
Bad,
Yeah. I think today it's relying on those application parameters that come in specifically when I launch via VS.
Right.
And so I'm wondering if there's a way to clone or plumb those into another application. But I don't know of a way to do it today.
Yeah, we'll go back and think about this, Marcin, because I think we're going to end up heading in this direction anyways.
Yep.
Where you're going to have to be able to attach a debugger when you're not deploying through Visual Studio. That's going to be pretty important.
Yep. I mean,
So,
today you can do it. It's just
you can do it, but it's manual. Yeah.
It's attached process. And
Yeah. I can't think of a good way off the top of my head right now, but I think it's something we need to.
Yeah, the closest thing I can think of is that debugger flag.
Yeah.
Okay, we're currently
So
running
thanks.
out.
Yeah. Thank you.
Currently, we're running our 2 web applications and 3 MVC .NET 4.6 in multiple cloud services. Web applications communicate with each other on public exposed. We want to migrate to Service Fabric. Looks like you want to use containers. First one to use containers, but we don't have to rewrite the code, and one of the worker roles, which I think can run as a guest executable. So I guess your answer is.
Yeah, run those in containers. That's fine.
We also need an
That's-
application gateway.
That happens today. So you have vanity domains, 20 to 100 vanity domains, but only a few web applications. So I guess those are all being routed to the same applications. You should be able to do this with Application Gateway. I think what you would end up doing is on the back end, you'd have these MVC applications running in containers, and they'd all be listening on unique ports. And Application Gateway allows you to do a little bit of HTTP routing, either based on host name or URL path to a specific port on the back end pool of machines. So you could do it that way. So you could have Application Gateway set up with all your vanity domains and just have that traffic routed to those backend applications based on the ports that they're running on. That should work just fine. So Service Fabric doesn't know anything about this, about how traffic is routed through. So that's all at the Application Gateway. Because the traffic isn't going through any Service Fabric construct. It's just going into the Application Gateway. Application Gateway says, okay, this is hostname X. That will go to port Y, and so it forwards a request on port Y. It should preserve the host header. So when the web application receives a request, you can always examine the host header, and that'll tell you what domain the request came from.
Okay.
So that's that port forwarding. It's basically port forwarding through Application Gateway.
But
The other way, yeah, go ahead.
But the application gateway supports only up to 20 SSL certificates if I go for the vanity domain, but because each vanity domain will have its own SSL certificate. So do I have to deploy a multiple application gateway if I'm going for 100?
And you might need multiple application gateways. Yeah, I'm not aware of that limitation, but if it's there, then probably multiple application gateways. The other thing you can do, application gateways, I mean, it's just ARR. It's a bunch of IIS instances. You can always stand up your own proxies on a couple of VMs and set up your own routing that way. So there's a ton of proxy solutions out there today that can do all this stuff as well. It's a little more manual work. Application gateway is just sort of it's a hosted service that provides proxies for you, but you can always stand up a couple of VMs and put proxies on them yourself, and just do it that way too.
Yeah, that's one way around it.
Yeah.
I also feel like they might have a premium tier, but maybe that's already it.
I thought so too. 20 seems like a pretty small limit.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's on the side. That's the only parameter I saw on the documentation, that it can have only more than up to 20 certificates on a single application gateway. So I thought maybe I have to deploy multiple application gateway pointing to the single service fabric cluster.
right? So then you could create multiple. You could create multiple application gateways if you wanted. That should-
Okay. He's right, though. I just checked, the
That's
support is only 20 SSL
Yeah, it's
certificates.
really low. Yeah, it's pretty low.
Okay, we sometimes run into issues like wrong.NET framework version when chosen to compile our services for, but Service Fabric doesn't really show the exact error in the logs. We're able to find out when we RDP or VM onto the machine and view the event logs. There's a recommendation on how to find these errors.
Yeah, so I'll give an answer which I'm sure some folks are getting tired of hearing, which is that hopefully in 6.1, there's a bunch of improvements that are coming around these types of local errors when the activation of the process fails for whatever reason, whether it's the CLR version is wrong, certificates are configured wrong, there's some other application or missing DLL type error. Things like that should be surfaced much more cleanly as a health message, which you'd see in SFX. That's something that we're investing in and are going to continue in further releases, so that these types of basic situations where something's just misconfigured, and today we just kind of say couldn't activate your process, it's below target. Hopefully some of those error messages will become more clear and more verbose. If this one doesn't get caught, we'll enhance it so that it does. It's another simple example.
Yeah, this is a good one.
In the meantime, what you're doing is what I would tell you to do. It's not great, but it's the quickest way while you're debugging stuff to figure out what's going wrong.
Okay, before we go to the next question, a little bit of a time check.
Sure.
Okay, we got 20 minutes. Yeah, we got to speed up some of these questions. Martin asks, I would like to understand if the service volume driver is mounted to a container.
Manny, quick, go.
So this Fabric volume driver.
How does it work, pretty much?
Well, volume driver, we should just talk, I think the main thing is that we're building a volume driver and it's coming.
Yeah.
And then you're mounted by configuring it inside your containers.
Yeah, you just provide it as part of your service manifest and say the volume driver is Service Fabric.
Yeah. It should be the same way like your the cloud drive which you do.
Except that you don't really have to install anything or set the volume driver, it's there by default.
Yeah.
Yes, we announced the volume driver build last year and you're getting close. Just to say, for a preview that will come out. Okay, regarding default services, will VSTS tooling, SF deploys support the new stuff?
I think that it should already, but I haven't tried it through VSTS. But in VSTS, there's also just a Service Fabric PowerShell task that I've used instead of start service or anything else. So I basically take the code that was in my start service and that goes into my PowerShell task in VSTS, and it works pretty much the same way. That's why that PowerShell task kind of exists, so that after you've done all the type registration and copying the application packages and everything, you just execute a PowerShell script, and that can create all the services whatever way you want.
Okay, what's the ETA for Service Fabric support availability zones?
It's supported today. I mean, you can edit your templates, move your VMSS to be AZ aware, and it's supported today. So there isn't anything in SF which prevents you to do that.
Is there an example template?
There's an example template in my private GitHub. I have not deployed it I have not published it into the samples itself, which I will do so.
Is it worth posting that now or is it not?
We can.
So let's just move it into the real place.
Yeah, I think I'll move it to the real place. Always just Jack Dan is the GitHub. Right?
Everyone knows who you are.
So Helm for third-party stuff.
Yeah, so we'd also love to run third-party things. We've been looking at this quite a bit recently. I can't guarantee it'll be Helm specifically, but yes, we're working on some way at least to allow you to run third-party applications like Mongo and Rabbit and just plop them down in Service Fabric. So yeah, that should be coming at some point.
So Mark, I think we answered it because I think that was his question about App Gateway. So I hope we're
logging via App Insights or Azure Diagnostics on a cluster creation. Can you get the Azure storage account tied to the logging?
No, I think it's just escape.
Yeah, I think. Is that Owens?
Yeah.
Owens.
He was helping a previous question, and yes, that is correct.
Okay, I'm going to go to Owens then.
Yep.
We're hosting a cluster in Azure on a virtual machine scale sets. How should we orchestrate Windows upgrades? Is there a patch orchestration there's a patch orchestration application available. Will it support upgrades to the VMSS image?
So a couple of questions are intermingled in this, right? So one is patching your OS itself, that use the patch orchestration that actually is what is the only supported option from Service Fabric. So there is something else which is coming from VMSS, which allows you to update your images to a newer image. So that will also take care of if someone wants to go from, say, server 2016 to 2016 with container option, or a 2016 newer image. So both of them act the same way. They will orchestrate them UD by UD. That's something in preview. So that will be announced by VMSS pretty soon.
I think they've announced it already, the image-based patching.
Yeah, so image-based patching, if it's announced, that takes care of a few of the questions which like Mikhail has as to how do you patch your VMSS using the new image, and the same way you will do the same thing for going to a new OS as well. So both of these are supported, except in the scenario where you are going from a 2016 RS1 to an RS3 that specifically is not supported by the Windows team itself. That was the only, I was just going to put a caveat out there. But otherwise, the images patching will be there and you can use it. It's in preview now.
Sorry, Chaco. Hello?
Yeah.
I think there's a separate idea of an upgrade domain in virtual machine scale sets and in Service Fabric clusters. Are those going to be connected in some way? Will the scale set upgrades respects upgrade domains in Service Fabric?
So there isn't anything unique about the upgrade domains which we use. We actually use the ones with the Fabric controller all the way down the infrastructure has. So that's the same upgrade domain which VMSS will use. So whenever VMSS sees that we have an extension called Service Fabric, they will do a UD walk. Today it doesn't do a UD walk, and that I think is what you're talking about. But the understanding and the logic we have put into VMSS is that when they see a extension called Service Fabric, then they will do a UD walk for any model changes. You can just maybe instance count changes, changing the OS, whatever else, they will all be doing UD walks. So the UDs are the same as what you would see in Service Fabric. So if you're worried about your stateful services, it should not be destructive, but actually will be walking UD by UD.
Okay, so answer the question.
Yeah, so we answered a couple of other questions which were down as well.
Yeah, just I guess one last question. The second one in this list, how do we manage a situation where the nodes don't need to be, or the machines don't need to be upgraded per se, they just need to be restarted? Which is what we saw.
That would be restarted Service Fabric node.
Yeah, so if it's just a Fabric KXC, which is a node, yes, you just restart the node.
But I would do one, watch the cluster to be healthy, wait for everything to be fine, and then restart the next one. But that's a 5-liner PowerShell.
Yeah. So and then the restart of and because FM will not allow you unsafe node restarts anyway. So, yeah.
Good.
Thanks.
If I use Service Server Explorer to deploy services, can I set the application parameters? I don't know that we actually exposed this in the SFX UI today. I think that's coming, but we haven't done it yet.
For application instances,
you
can put an application parameter. For individual services, though,
yeah,
you wouldn't be able to do it for individual.
Back to converted in.